And I'm going to invite our Jacob. We can do 2 questions. Jacob and then Ian.
I have just a question that connects to Dan, but it's for Nicolas. You know, I don't know if you've seen Karthik Ramana here in the States. He's criticized the Federal Accounting Standards Board for its defense of fair value, basically showing how PAC money, lobbying money, was used to bolster fair value via Congress and the FASB to influence accounting standards to help them with mergers and acquisitions of certain companies. What I'm hearing is that the IPSAS board does not have the kind of makeup, because this is one of the things that we need to avoid, is the appearance that an accounting standards board is captured by corporate or banking interests, for example. So I'm wondering how, for example, because I know he mentions the IFRS and how China got some stipulations to let it out of a lot of sovereign issues were not accounted for. So how do we deal with that issue outside of, I know the FSB thing, I don't know so much if there are challenges to both IPSAS and the IFRS.
So I can answer for IFRS. I don't think IPSAS have been used to an extent that people would really spend big lobbying money on them, but maybe there are episodes I'm not aware of. Okay, so you will tell us more juicy stories. It's just my ignorance that is reflected in this comment. For the ISB, obviously there is a lot of lobbying going on, and that's natural, as is the case with FASB. And then the question becomes, is there integrity in the organization? So you can compare it with Congress, which faces similar challenges, or you can look at it on a standalone basis. I think if you compare it to your typical parliament, it's a pretty technocratic organization, and that would be true probably both for FASB and ISB. Now, the thing is that you can never avoid at least the perception of capture, because there is always some interest that gains from a particular standard, and people will correlate that with the fact that the standard gets approved. And B, this is where the governance framework comes in, and that's why I emphasize that in my presentation, because I think it's a challenge for these organizations to find a governance framework that ensures their integrity and also the public perception of their integrity. And I don't think, I'm not going to go into the history of FASB. My point on ISB, to cut a long story short, is that they're still struggling with that, and they haven't found a sustainable response to this challenge, both in terms of perception and legitimacy, and also, as I mentioned, in terms of funding, because obviously there's a very strong connection between the funding framework and the governance framework.
Ian Ball?
Just wanted to perhaps react, and it may feed in a little bit what Ian Carruthers wants to say, but I just wanted to comment and perhaps get Nicolas' response to that. I think there are reasons why the IPSAS haven't been as widely adopted as IFRS at this point. I mean, the first point is very obvious, that IPSAS weren't developed until significantly later. So the first IPSAS were produced in 2000, whereas there was a full set of IFRS. So there's a time lag. But that's not the most important explanation. The most important explanation is that IFRS are not chosen by companies.
Right.
They don't choose to adopt them. They're mandatory. Companies are required to adopt them. So, and governments are not required by anybody else to adopt IPSAS. So there's a self-interested dimension to this in the sense that governments impose IFRS because it makes companies more accountable. They don't impose IPSAS on themselves because it makes them more accountable. And we saw this very dramatically in the post-2010 period, when the Econ Committee of the European Parliament that recommended the six-pack that Dan referred to also recommended that member states be required to adopt IPSAS within 3 years. And you can't believe how quickly the council killed that particular recommendation. You know, it's great for other people to be accountable, but don't bring it to us.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've already made several of the points I was going to make. I mean, I do think in this discussion, the key point is that, as you said, you know, the first IPSAS was only actually set in 2000. So, you know, we're 20 years behind IFRS in terms of history. I do think the point about, and I would certainly agree with you, I think there is a real challenge for an international organisation to be seen to be free from bias. And it's almost a kind of impossible ask, because whoever actually doesn't feel they've got a seat on the board will always say, well, you're beholden to them. And IPSASB had precisely this problem when it consulted on governance and where it should sit. Ideally it should sit somewhere independently, but where's the money going to come from for that? The argument at the moment is you get 50% of your funding through IFAC, you're a private sector organisation. A number of governments do actually fund IPSASB, and we get resources in through partnerships and things like that. But it still is very much, a hand-to-mouth existence. And I think that's actually where, the question came from that I asked earlier on today, which is actually the markets actually need to wake up to the information that can be made available through IPSAS. And actually, in terms of where you get funding from, that's actually where it really should come from. At the moment, you're criticising the profession for actually providing the money. And also, I might just say, and okay, I probably would say this, wouldn't I? But actually, you look at ISB, IFRS trustees, it's a totally different organisation. You've got 150 staff, a full-time board. We've got a volunteer board and 8 staff. I'm the first remunerated chair that the board's actually had. So, actually I would look at it and say, isn't it bloody amazing how in less than 20 years we've got to the stage where actually most of the countries in Latin America are adopting IPSAS. They're likely to form the core of European public sector accounting standards and so on. I think it's a good news story.
If I may just make a very brief comment on this, obviously I agree it's amazing and congratulations for the great work. That's not really what my point was not to say, and I think I made that point, that IPSAS was doing less than it should do. My point was to think ahead. And I think without drawing conclusions too rashly from that parallel, it is worth pondering on what happened to the IS committee. And the IS committee was formed as part of IFAC, like IPSAS, and then it was, at some point it divorced from IFAC in several steps actually. And in 2001, it adopted, broadly speaking, its current structure as an independent global organization. Again, I'm not saying there is strict parallelism here. This is clearly not what I imply. It's not mechanical, but I think it's worth thinking about this.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, in an effort, thank you to the distinguished panel, in an effort to keep us moving so that we're not here till